Hi, we're here with Franklin Chang Diaz. He is CEO of Ad Astra, a rocket company, and we're going to talk about innovation, the space race, and technology. Hi, Franklin. Thanks for joining us.
That's a pleasure. Glad to be here.
So I was looking over your business, and I mean, rocket ships are really cool. You're a former astronaut. That's pretty awesome too. And there's some renewable energy. So I guess just walk us through, what your company does, and you're based
Yeah.
in Texas and Costa Rica, which is an interesting model too. So I guess just start with some background about, how you started a company and where
Yeah.
it's headed.
Yeah. Sure. The company is Ad Astra Rocket Company. It really is a spin-off from NASA. We used to be a facility at NASA. We used to be part of the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, and it was called the Advanced Space Propulsion Laboratory. And back in 2005, NASA was going through a reorganization of its priorities in rocket propulsion. And that whole topic of advanced electric propulsion, which is what we were doing in this laboratory, became de-emphasized. So a lot of those programs were going to be discontinued. And we decided to leave the agency and create a private entity that will continue to work despite of the fact that NASA was not that interested at the time. So we did that, and NASA agreed. And so we created Ad Astra Rocket Company in 2005. And within a couple of months of that transition, I was able to raise quite a bit of private capital, private money, which came to really inject a tremendous amount of energy into the company to continue to develop the propulsion system that we had been working on for about 20 years before that. And that's called the Vasimer engine. It's a new type of electric rocket, high power electric rocket. And as time has passed over the years, here we are in the year 2020, in the year 2015, NASA came back and became interested again in the project and gave us a contract. But of course, by then we had already developed the technology to a high level of maturity. And so, NASA, we're back in the groove with NASA and continuing to push the technology readiness to get it flying. And we hope to get it flying pretty soon.
So this was part of when NASA, started to privatize a lot of things and kind of look towards outside vendors like SpaceX to basically kind of develop the private partnership model, right?
Yeah, that was part of the wave that was taking place within the agency. A lot of the interest from the private sector became real with real money. And people began to see that space really is a place to do business and, a place to work. And so, more power to it. I think this is a great thing that's happening right now.
Where do you think we are in terms of space commercialization and tourism? And, I mean, the SpaceX rocket just took off and looked like a success. Where would your rocket fit in terms of, either moving payloads or tourism, or I guess, where does it fit in?
Yeah, we're just at the beginning, but our rocket is not a rocket to launch into space. Our rocket is an in-space propulsion system, meaning that it takes over once you are in space. So the chemical, traditional chemical rockets that SpaceX and Blue Origin and Boeing and all these other vendors are producing now cheaply and much more economically, they're going to continue to be important in the whole game. But once you get into space, then electric propulsion is really the end game. That is where things will eventually go. And electric propulsion has been around for a long time. You're talking about things like ion engines and other devices called Hall effect thrusters, plasma rockets, and this is what we do. But they've been hampered by the non-availability of power, electricity. They need electricity, and electricity has been at a premium in space up until now. Now, solar panels and solar arrays are becoming much more powerful to the point that now they can power more powerful rockets. And we are entering into the space with this new type of an engine that is able to process a great deal of power. Essentially, we're building sort of like the diesel engine of space, you know, to enable the trucking business. You can imagine of trucking, space trucking, you know, the ability to transport cargo from point A to point B in space efficiently and economically. Chemical rockets can't do that.
So first you needed the solar systems the solar panel systems to basically work, and that sort of is the precursor to what your rocket can do.
Right. We needed the electric power source to be able to power the rocket, and that was a limiting factor. But now that technology has come of age, and so now we can think of rockets, electric rockets that operate at hundreds of kilowatts, whereas before we're talking about a few kilowatts. 100 kilowatts and 300 kilowatts. These are power levels that are comparable to the power of a small SUV, for example, of a light truck. And these kinds of power levels enable you to transport cargo much more efficiently and much greater payload for the amount of fuel that you require to deliver the payload. You get better bang for the buck, so to speak. And that's what we believe is going to transform the industry.
So when you think about innovation, most of the companies I talk to, innovation cycles are anywhere from 3 to 5 years. I mean, your products and approaches, you have to think in decades almost, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. This technology is completely new, and it has become real thanks to sort of the accretion or the convergence of various pieces that were not available back in the 1970s and even in the 80s when we started developing this activity. These technologies were still very, very immature. We're talking about high power electric power processing units, things that can deliver electricity into the rocket in the right form. And these units have to be very lightweight, very compact, very efficient. That's one. The other thing is, this plasma that comes out of the exhaust of the rocket is extremely hot. We're talking about temperatures of a few million degrees. So there's no material that can handle these kinds of temperatures. So we use magnetic fields, magnetic bottles, magnetic pipes, and these magnetic pipes, of course, require magnets. And these magnets cannot be conventional, copper magnets, because it would be impossible to get that stuff up into space or power it. So we use superconducting magnets. Superconducting technology is also a new technology that's come of age too at about the same time. So lots of these little ingredients that are coming together and enable the rocket to be so.
So for the innovation cycle, does this start on a whiteboard somewhere? Does it start with primary research?
It does.
It's just interesting that it starts off and there's, you need all these things to come together and they're not really together. So
a lot of the research really began in the 70s and late 60s with the fusion program, the thermonuclear fusion program of the United States. And this was work that was not being done by NASA. This was work that was being done by the Department of Energy. And before that, even the Atomic Energy Commission. So we're talking about technology that grew in a different place. It was not NASA technology. It just came to NASA as part of the ingredients that were needed. But there was also an interesting effect that you have to achieve. There's a lot of siloing of knowledge in the various industries and the various research areas. So people who are working in fusion, plasma physics, are not so much interested in rockets or don't know very much about it. people who are doing rockets don't really know much about plasma rockets. And so you have to bring these communities together. And that was a big challenge back in the 80s and 90s. Fortunately, we did that while we were still at NASA.
What makes it easier today to bring those silos together? Is it technology, collaboration?
Well, there's a lot more communication these days amongst the groups. I think people are beginning to overlap a lot more in many fields, not just in space, energy, space, communication, all of that. It begins to mush together, and certainly the internet allows you to do this kind of communication, fluid and very, very efficiently. So I think that this is just the way the way it is today. It would have been a lot more difficult to do that in the 60s and 70s than it is today.
What's the role of software and technology and hardware when it comes to simulating what you would see in space?
Well, the role of software is invaluable. It's extraordinary for us. We rely on software to model the performance of the rocket before we build it. It's important because these things are very expensive to build, and it takes a long time to actually finish them. So you want to make sure that you're at least 80% there in making sure that it's going to work. Obviously, there are always surprises and always things that you never really were able to simulate. But I mean, the simulation, the software, it really takes a big bite from the uncertainty that you have to deal with in this innovative projects. And then once you have the rocket operating, software is key to make it work. The operation of the engine, things in plasma physics, and the behavior of these plasmas in magnetic fields, all of that behavior happens in a matter of microseconds, maybe even milliseconds. So very fast. So if you are going to react to unforeseen conditions of control, you need to have a software module, a software program that can react fast enough.
So I know you use NI software and hardware. What are some of the other vendors you use? And do you use the cloud for simulations, or how does that work out?
We don't use the cloud. We are very protective about our intellectual property here in our company. It's very unique technology. It's very well. It's very controlled. We have multiple programs that we have developed ourselves, but in terms of the hardware that we use, obviously NI is a key provider of hardware and technology for us to enable these engines to operate. Not just the engine, but also for the operation of the laboratory. And it turns out that we are using the products, NI products, also in the other sort of universe of our company, which is the field of electric propulsion on the ground, on Earth, which is hydrogen fuel cells and transportation using hydrogen as a vector for energy storage from solar and wind. And so we're moving into that space, decarbonizing the whole transportation industry. And we're starting in a small place in Costa Rica, my home country, my country of origin, and we're transforming the transportation matrix there to hydrogen.
What has been the biggest hang-up with hydrogen? I mean, I followed the market, years ago, and now it's, the Tesla lithium batteries and solar and hybrid.
It's always this conversation about the chicken and the egg. You can have hydrogen electric vehicles, but they won't work if you don't have the hydrogen stations to fuel them. and then people are not going to build the hydrogen stations to fuel them unless the vehicles are there to to actually use the hydrogen. So it's like which one goes first. And so we have convinced ourselves that we need to do both, and that we need to create ecosystems which produce and consume hydrogen in sort of in an integrated ecosystem. This is how we implemented it in Costa Rica, and we believe that these ecosystems can be multiplied and reproduced really everywhere. And all it takes is cheap electricity from solar and wind, and also water. So those are the ingredients that you need to make it go. In some niches it works. In some other niches where petrochemicals and oil and gas are still very cheap, it's very difficult to compete. But in Costa Rica, there's no oil. There is no natural gas. The price of gasoline there is, you'd say, about $4 a gallon. And so, under those conditions, the business works. And there are many other countries that have similar conditions, and we believe that that's the place to start.
So the Costa Rica model, it's mostly based on mass transit right now?
Well, we're doing, the niche that's interesting for hydrogen is the heavy duty transportation, the heavy transportation, the buses, the trucks, the trains, the ships, and anything that deals with long duration, continuous operation, and heavy transport. The automobile is sort of kind of a mixture of battery electric and fuel cell hydrogen electric. So I think that market is not as clear just yet. And eventually it will resolve itself to be maybe a mixture of both. But I think that the clear winner is the heavy duty transportation, the trucks, the buses, the trains, the ships, and maybe even the airplanes. We're gonna get into airplanes at some point.
So you've been involved in a handful of shuttle flights. What has, working in NASA and being an astronaut, what has that taught you about leadership in terms of a company?
Well, leadership to me is, you lead by letting your team, empower your team to do the best they can, to achieve their full potential. In many ways, the leader sort of gets out of the way. The leader is the ultimate facilitator. That's what really a leader is. It's a facilitator. It makes it easy for others in the team to do their jobs and not get too wrapped up into their daily life, so that you kind of get in their way. So, and of course, you take care of your team. This is one of the most important things about a leader, is you take care of your people. You make sure that everybody's okay. Make sure in these times of crises, of pandemics and health issues, you want to make sure your team is okay. Because if they're not okay, mentally or physically, they're not going to work well. And so it's very important to me that we do that.
Anything to add that I didn't ask?
Well, I always think that space is, of course, a new frontier. I think everybody realizes that. But I think we still need to make sure that this frontier is developed in an equitable way. That is, that it becomes democratized. You need to democratize space so that everyone on this planet has the opportunity to go there if they want to, or if they want to work there, so they have the opportunity to do it. And if we don't do that, then space will be the realm of only the rich and powerful. And I don't think that that's a recipe for good success. So, as long as we can make that space accessible to everyone, then I'm happy.
Where does that start?
It starts with an understanding that some countries that have the capability and knowledge to deploy the first elements of infrastructure in space need to be, um, you know, generous enough, I guess, with their know-how to open it up to others, to enable opportunity for other countries. It's good business because, you know, you're creating a market, you're creating a service economy. So it's not that you're doing this just because you want to be philanthropic. It's good business to make sure everybody is included. The more people that get up there, the better it is. Right now, if you look at what's going on in space, you look at people in the space station, you know, they're pretty much representatives of the, you know, a handful of countries that are playing in the space arena now. Maybe a dozen or so countries have been able to do this. We're still missing about 180 countries, and so we got still a long ways to go. I think this is going to change, and I think the private sector is going to enable this to happen.
So the private sector will enable it because they're always looking for talent, and they'll be open to new countries and talent.
They're looking for business. They're looking for business, and you know, money from whatever is just as good as money from whatever. So, you know, it's a matter of good business. And so, so I think this, you know, it bodes well for the future of space. And, you know, having the private sector getting involved it's a really good thing that's happening.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. My pleasure.